When I first got into this hobby of painting tabletop miniatures, I honestly thought it doesn't matter what paints I use.
It doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
But after painting miniatures for 2 years, I've come to the hard truth that it does. It really does, but probably not for the reasons you're thinking. So let's talk about it. Now, does that mean that you can't paint high-quality miniatures with just your run-of-the-mill 50-cent paints from the hobby store? Yes and no. And I know that sounds confusing, but at the end of the day, green is green, red is red. And if you can mix or buy a cheap paint that matches a good paint in color, technically you can do the same job. So, what makes them different? For the last year, these apple barrel paints have been my best friend because they're 50 cents. And everything that I have painted on this channel up until last week has been with these paints. And they are totally usable, but they are going to leave you wanting more in multiple areas. So let's talk about those. First up is Zenithal. I got a miniature right here that is Zenithal highlighted, okay? And it just means that you prime it and then you hit it from the top with a usually white, right? With this one's yellow and blue. It's blue from the bottom and yellow from the top. But it gives that a look of being hit by light while being in a dark place. And you might think, okay, I can Zenithal, and you can. You can Zenithal to your heart's content, right? With those paints. The difference is that when you start painting that miniature, and I've talked about this before, like, do Zenithal highlights actually do anything? And for me, they weren't doing anything because I couldn't tell. Because I had to put the paint on either so thick or so thin. And when I do it thick, it just completely covers it, then it's Zenithal. And when I do it thin, because you should be thinning your paints almost always, unless the paint is like the perfect consistency, which I hate to break it to you, even with like expensive paints, that's not always the case. It's usually not the case, but you got to thin your paints with a little bit of water. And these paints, the cheap paints that I have used, when you thin them down, there is so little pigment in the paint that you have to forget 2 thin coats. You're looking at 6 or 7 thin coats. And by the time you've done that many, your Zenithal is basically gone. Or, like I said, you can do it nice and thick.
Dave Kim likes them thick.
Same thing. The Zenithal is gone because you put it on so thick. Okay? And so it's one of those things that Zenithal highlights are super nice because they allow you to see the blueprint of where things need to be light and dark, and it just makes your job easier. And when you thin a good quality paint, you can see that. And an example I have, I just started painting this guy. This is Vargas. He's from Warmachine. And I wanted his hair to be a little lighter on top than it was on the sides. And guess what? With the Zenithal highlight, it was perfect. One thin coat, and I got nice solid black on the sides and a lighter grayish, almost yellowish, because that's the Zenithal color I used, color on top. And so for the first time in ever of miniature painting, I was able to do something in one thin coat and see the Zenithal highlight and feel like, holy cow, that was worth doing. And I'm painting a whole army. I've got like 30 other people to paint still for this army. And knowing that the Zenithal is going to work now because I have good paints is huge. The second thing that I gotta talk about is your time. Your time is important. It is a commodity. You can't get it back. Okay? And if you're painting an army, whether it's for Warmachine or Warhammer or Malifaux or whatever it is, okay, when you're painting an army, it's gonna take your time. And I used to watch these videos and see people do these challenges of, I'm going to paint a miniature in 10 minutes. I'm going to paint a miniature in 30 minutes, you know, and see these different things that they're doing. I would watch those and I would think, how can you even paint a miniature in 30 minutes? Like, that's impossible. You can't. Because again, if you wanted to do it right with the cheaper paints, and not all cheap paints are that way, but it's very uncommon to find one that isn't. Okay? The cheaper you go, the less pigment they use, the more medium they use, and so if you want good coverage, you have to thin it out and do a million coats. And so I could not paint anything quickly. But like I was saying, with this miniature Vargas, this is all one coat or 2 coats of paint. That's it. And so I was able to paint this in like record time for a miniature. And granted, it's not done. It's still got some other stuff to do. But I was able to do it so fast. And time is something you can't get back. Yes, you can do the same job with these paints. Like I said, I've been doing it for years. And I can only imagine how many hundreds of hours I've lost because I didn't have better quality paint. Now, another thing that I'm going to kind of call out P3 for, right? I got my new P3 paints. This is the first like good paints that I've ever had. And they are notorious for being easy to blend. It's just like a creamier paint. And so it allows you to blend colors better. And if you don't know what that means, it's just going from one shade to a different shade or one color to a different color. And you have that nice blend in the middle, right? And so it looks like actual shadow and shade and you know, just color changing. And so cheaper paints almost always are going to dry really fast, and they make blending hard unless you put them on really thick. And again, then you're back to the same problem you had before with everything else. So blending wise, better paints are just easier to blend. And little newsflash, if you're doing non-metallic metal, guess what that is? That's mostly blending or layering. Kind of the same, kind of different. Non-metallic metals are so much easier with this paint than they have ever been before. And I live in Utah, so it's nice and dry here all the time. So my paint's dry all the time. Painting without a wet palette is like no can do. Sorry. You gotta have a wet palette. But these make it possible without one, and just a dream to do with one. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about in this video, which might not be a big thing for you, but for me was a huge thing, is that better quality paints, when they dry, I don't even know, better, they dry harder, they dry more firm on the model. And for you, that might not be a big deal. But for me, when I'm painting, I'm usually holding it in one hand, and I'll put my finger on top to get all the other stuff that I need to do. And so after I put my finger on top with these cheap paints, I would generally have to repaint the head every single time because it would just wear off on my finger, usually down to the primer. Every single time. And as I was painting Vargas, I kept putting my finger on his head or on the back of him, and I was shocked to find that the paint stayed on.
I mean, it was like magic.
The paint was there, and granted, I know that I shouldn't be painting that way. I'm a freaking Neanderthal, but that's how I paint. And so for me, that was another big thing, is it's nice to not have this paint just rub off, and all this work that I've done just come off in 5 minutes because of how I held the miniature. And so for me, that was a big one. Might not be a factor for you, but for me it was. Now, with that being said, if I was getting into this hobby, would I immediately go out and spend $300 on brand new paints? The answer is no.
Oh, I'm poor.
No, I don't think I went about this the wrong way, because I didn't know if I was going to like painting armies. I didn't know if I was going to like this process as a whole, painting miniatures. And so using cheap paints and just getting that first Space Marine painted up and looking at it and just being like, man, I like doing this. That was fun. I'm going to paint some more. It was worth it for me. And like I said, for the last almost 2 years, these are the only paints that I've been using. So it is doable. And for starting out, heck, if you can go out and spend $10 on paint, that's huge. Because miniatures, let's be honest, they're expensive enough. And if you're buying a printer and you're printing things, that's expensive enough. So some cheap paints out the door, it'll take some of that stress off of you and just allow you to get in there and paint. But the painting experience is going to be a tough one. And for a little while, that's okay, right? But if you're going to keep doing this, sure, buy a couple paints here and there. And I'm not saying that you have to buy P3 paints, right? I like these, and these are the first ones that I wanted to use because the creaminess that people talk about and the ease of blending that people talk about was something I really wanted because I want to try that. But every paint has their qualities, their ups and their downs, you know. Like I said, even some of these cheap paints are awesome. Some of the blacks cover better than just about any black, or as well as any of the blacks that I've ever dealt with. So I mean, there are diamonds in the rough, even among cheap paints. But there's a lot better quality control when you buy better paints. And ultimately, they will make your life a lot easier. So I'm curious to know, do you think the brand matters? You know, is there a brand that you swear by up and down that has every perfect color? Because I'd love to hear about it. You know, have you tried P3? Do you like them? And when it comes down to it, those of you who have paid those hundreds of dollars for those paints, do you think it was worth it? Do you wish you had done it earlier, or do you wish you had held off and maybe went with some cheap paints first? I'd honestly like to know, because maybe I am an idiot. Maybe my painting career could be so much further if I had just spent some money and got good paints in the beginning. But honestly, I'm happy with the way that I did it. And if you'd like to see more of the painting that I can do with good paints, hit that like button. Comment below, let me know what's going on. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see this army taken to completion, because that's what I've been doing for the last couple weeks, and I'll keep doing until this army's done, and then we'll move on to something else. But we're going to keep painting and keep making the tabletop experience the best that it can be for me and hopefully for you. So, stick around. And as always, don't spend so much time building your world, painting it, that you forget to spend some time in it. Till next time.